Now, history gives us an example of several people like Florence who have used their light to transform the society, but the greatest would come from Jesus Christ himself. We read in John that he is the light of the world, but Matthew tells us that the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, some of you here can claim the title of Magna or Summa Cum Laude. Many of you have been blessed with a great variety of talents and gifts. Let me remind you that our Lord said, "To whom much has been given, much is required." Others of you here may claim that your talent pool seems a bit lacking. You have struggled for every C, and the fact that you're sitting here today seems like an absolute miracle. I have something to say to you as well. Throughout the course of history, God has used the most unlikely people by the world's estimation to make the most dramatic impact. Moses complained that he had a speech impediment, yet he was chosen to be the voice box of God to set the Israelites free from captivity. When Jesus came to earth to choose disciples, men who would begin the early church, he did not seek out the rulers. He didn't even go to the temples. He sought the blue-collar workers, fishermen, and even the despised tax collector. If you open your heart and life to God, he will use you to transform the world around you. My final story today speaks to how God uses the smallest and most insignificant by the world's estimation to make the most dramatic impact. My favorite patient was Gracie. She suffered from a debilitating disease that caused her to become confused at times and would ultimately take her life. But her precious demeanor never changed throughout the course of this illness. Now, the unique thing about Gracie is she was the most affectionate patient I have ever cared for. I would go in to see her, and she was constantly rubbing my hands and my arms. I'd lean down to listen to her heart, and she'd touch my face like I was one of her children or push my hair back and just smile at me ever so gently. When I became pregnant, my abdomen was her focus. I would waddle into the building, and her hands would be outstretched. I'd walk up. She'd begin caressing my abdomen and kissing it. We'd get all tangled up as I would try to listen to her lungs. And she would always ask me, "Am I having a baby?" I'd say, "No, Gracie, I'm having the baby." And she'd say, "I want a baby." I said, "You can see my baby when she's born." And I saw her on a regular basis, and the interaction was almost the same every time, and I looked forward to it. Well, time went on. Gracie got sicker. I put her on hospice care, and I went on maternity leave. When I came back, my very first page said, "Go see Gracie now." When I drove to the facility, the hospice nurse and the director of nursing met me at the door. They said, "Gracie hasn't had anything to eat or drink in over a week, and she's been in a coma for more than 3 days. The family's here, and they wanted you to tell them how much longer she has to live." Those of you in healthcare will stand with me and say that there are things that we see at the end of people's lives that we can't always explain. So I prayed for wisdom and insight as I walked down to her room. When I entered, oh, she was as beautiful as ever, but she looked close. So I did an evaluation of Gracie, and through that process, I did a little sternal rub to see if she'd respond to painful stimuli. No response even to pain. She was very deep into a coma. So I turned to the family and said, "I can explain pathophysiology to you, but I cannot explain God's timing or sheer human will. Sometimes people are waiting for a certain day or the fulfillment of a promise. I don't know how they do it. I only know that they do." So they thought about that, and they said, "No, everyone's here. I don't know what she would be waiting on." Oh, and I thought about what I had told her so many times. So I called my husband and said, "Can you bring our little Rachel up here?" My little Rachel was all of about 5 weeks old. I walked back into the room and said, "Gracie, I told you could see my baby when she was born, and she is right here." Gracie opened up her eyes. Gasps fell across the room. She reached her arm up to try to touch Rachel, but she was so weak that it just fell back down to her side. So I put my little Rachel in bed with Gracie. I put Rachel's foot in Gracie's palm. She was so tactile so she could squeeze it. And I stroked Gracie's head and said, "Oh, Gracie, you have fought the good fight. It is time for you to rest now." She gave Rachel's little foot one last squeeze, slipped back into a coma, and died a short while later. I scooped up my baby girl and said, "Oh, God has used you even in your infancy. And let me say to all of you, He will use you to transform the world around Him if you will only open up your heart and life to Him. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and praise your Father who is in heaven. Go and transform society." Thank you.